You know where to go.
Okay.
Good evening.
Okay.
It's fired.
Make sure I'm lined up, not cutting my hair. All right, well, welcome to the class. It is 4 o'clock. And let's start off by singing the song we sang this morning for church. That'd be great. Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity that you've granted us to be here this afternoon. We pray that you will bless, guide, and direct us as we continue our evangelism training course. We pray in the name of Christ. Amen. All right. Let us continue our class with a recap. The very first time, last month, we had a discussion on the 5 secrets or the 5 fundamentals to Bible study and to working with other people. And we talked about the first one being a spiritual person. The second one was telling your testimony. I want to share with you guys a little bit more information on the first one before we get into 3 and 4 today with Hannah and I. And I think I didn't get a chance to share with you guys this information before. So this is brand new information that I usually typically share when it comes to mentoring. When I mentor young pastors and young Bible workers and so forth and so on. So let me find it here. Okay, here it is. All right. So in a mentoring model that I put together a long time ago that really focuses on being a spiritual person, Sister White makes a statement that we are a being that has 4 different levels. We have a spiritual level, we have a physical level, we have a psychological level, and then we have what's the other one? Social, that's exactly right. We have a social level. And so what I have done is with this mentoring model, I began to realize that all of these 4 sections, the mind, the emotions, the spiritual, and the physical. It wasn't so much social. Social is connected with emotion for sure. But all of these 4 components that Sister talks about, they all intersect. And I realized that if we were to spend 25% of our efforts in each of these areas and intentionally focus on each of these areas, then we will become a whole person. And so we will become an individual that be able to help other individuals and so forth and so on. So with this mentoring model that I began to develop over the years and helping other people understand, I began to realize that you have to become intentional in order to make an impact, whether in your community, whether in your family, or whatever that case may be. Things don't just happen accidentally. You know, you can't wish something to happen. Sometimes, most of the times, it has to be intentional. So you have to work intentionally with your mind, work intentionally with your spirituality, work intentionally with your physical nature, and work intentionally with your emotions. And so when it comes to being a spiritual person, if you focus on this one right here, there's a couple of things that I recommend that are very, very helpful to individuals when it comes to the spirituality. And one of them that I want to share with you before we continue is what I use a lot of acronyms, because acronyms help me remember the essence of what I'm trying to teach. So this is what I teach, the MWG time. Okay? MWG. And it basically means my time with God. And so it's a little bit longer than the acronym, tag time, other people use tag time. But this MWG, my time with God, is where I specifically spend some time alone with God. Many years ago, when I started to think about this reality, this was outside of, as a pastor, you spend a lot of time with God, preparing your sermons, Bible studies, etc., etc. But you almost have to become intentional as a pastor to really hone in on spending time with God and making sure that it's you and God alone. And so I've realized through the years that it's not just pastors, it's also members. Members have to become intentional in spending time with God. And what I realized a long time ago is this was so crucial that I started to take 1 day a week, just like a Sabbath, but I didn't call it a Sabbath day. I would take 1 day a week and I would go to the mountains. This is when I was really hardcore gun-ho about the mountains, and I really liked them back in those days. But I would go to the mountains with just my Bible, a water bottle, and a bag of lunch. That's it. And I would spend the entire day just talking with God, listening to God, meditating on God. And I would go deep into the wilderness there in Wyoming. And then I started reading a bear attack book. And then I got closer to my car after I read it halfway through the book. And by the time I finished that book, I was inside of my car with my window rolled down, just in case a bear were to attack me, I would be safe to turn on my car and get out of there quickly. But that time alone with God, intentionally, once a week, was really important for my development of spirituality and being a spiritual person. So much so, I don't know if I told you guys a story about Mark. Have I told you guys a story about Mark? Mark was a member of one of the churches that I pastored. And so I did not know the history of Mark. In fact, for those elders that have visited with me, I don't call you ahead of time. I just show up. And so that's what I did with Mark. And so I knocked on Mark's door because he was on the original list of the members. And so his wife, Sherry, answered the door. I think it's Sherry, yeah. So Sherry answered the door and she was shocked when I introduced myself. I said, hi, I'm Pastor Tello. I'm the new pastor for the Seventh-day Adventist Church here in this town. And so I just want to meet with you guys. You guys are on my list. And so she invited me in out of courtesy. And so I asked her if Mark was home. She said, yes, he is. And I could tell by her facial expression that there was some hesitation with her response. And so she led me downstairs into the basement of her home where Mark worked. Mark was a computer specialist. And so he was the one that worked on your computer. So if your computer had a virus or some type of screen problem, you would send it to Mark and Mark would take it downstairs to his basement, to his computer lab, and then he would fix it and then return it to you with a nice, price tag attached to it. And so that's what he did. So he was downstairs in his basement working, and here I come downstairs, and I go around the corner to where his office is, and he has about 3 computer screens, just like I used to have here in my office, 3 computer screens in front of him, and he's looking and working, and then here I am. First thing he said to me is, who are you? I said, I'm the pastor of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I did not know he hated the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That's what happens when you visit and you don't call ahead of time. This is the kind of information you find out. Furthermore, I did not know he hated Seventh-day Adventist pastors. So here I am, Seventh-day Adventist pastor, visiting him in his home, and because I didn't know this information, and hence the reason why his wife was hesitant when she opened the door in the first place, because I didn't know that information, I just had a conversation with him as if he was a long-lost friend. In fact, we're still friends even until today. So as we started to talk and I started to share with him why I was there, and I was hoping he'd come back to church, and haven't seen him in a while, and the church itself had a big, long history of negative stuff that happened in the community, hence the reason why he stepped away from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But what was interesting is through my relationship with him and developing a relationship with him, I told Mark about MWG, Moments with God. And so I told them about these moments with God, that what I found that the more I spend these moments of time with God, intentionally trying to understand God, trying to listen to God, trying to understand the purpose of whatever it is I'm trying to understand, that unlocked in me a hunger and a desire to know God more. It interested him so much that one time he went out with me. And so he said, "How we're going to go out to a place that I like." It was right by Yellowstone National Park. And so he took me out there to the middle of nowhere. And when I say nowhere, I'm talking about nowhere. It took a four-wheel drive truck to get us out there. And we're out there, and because Mark had a bear gun. Does anyone know what a bear gun is? A bear gun is a big, what do they call it, 45? The big, huge gun. And so he strapped it to his waist. And so just in case a bear were to come, he would pull out his gun, shoot in the air, or if not, worst case scenario, he'd shoot the bear. And so because he had his bear gun, I felt safe. And so I departed from the truck, went and found a little creek, and there I sat and spent time with God. Mark stayed in his truck because he had never done this before. And so he had never spent this intentional time with God. And he's like, "Howard, how do I do this?" I was like, "Just pretend he's right there. You're in the driver's seat. Just pretend Jesus right there in your passenger seat. Just have a conversation with him, and just share with him what's going on in your life. Share with him your frustrations. Share with him the anger you have toward the church. Share with him whatever it is you want to share with him, and just spend time with God." And so he did that. Half of the day came by, we ate lunch together, and we ended up going back home. And that right there, that unity that he and I developed with moments with God, really change our spirituality. And that's what I share with people when it comes to developing your spirituality. Another thing that I share with people is the acronym LFG. And LFG stands for Look for God. Developing your spirituality and developing yourself as a spiritual person also includes becoming intentional in looking for God in areas of your life or in situations of your life that you would not think he is there. Let me give you an example. In the context of a church, a very horrible board meeting. People are yelling at each other. People are nasty with each other. People are trying to pull each other's hairs out. God can be found even in that particular situation. When 9/11 took place and It Is Written decided to go to ground zero and to evaluate and to do something with some type of presentation to explain what happened with 9/11, Mark Finley was still the speaker director for It Is Written back in those days. And Mark Finley, he had the camera on. I remember that. He had the camera on. He was dressed just like me, no shirt, no tie. And so he was talking to the people there. And one of the questions that Mark Finley asked is, where was God? Because that's what people were asking. Where was God when these planes hit these buildings? Where was God when people were jumping from the windows of these buildings and you can see them even till today? And so where was God? And he just kept going on and on and on, asking the question that everyone in New York and everyone in the world was asking through the television camera there with It Is Written. The fascinating thing was the answer of Mark Finley, because he says God was in that person walking that little old lady down the street. God was in the fireman, running into the building that was on fire that he had no idea it was going to come down on him. God was in, and he just kept going on and on. And for those that are accustomed to Mark Finley, you know that he goes on and on with his repertoire of words and phrases in order to impact the mind of the human being with his message. So looking for God becomes an intentional aspect of your life. So when you're having a difficult moment or you're having a challenging moment, for example, for me, Isaiah decides to derobe. Does anybody know what derobe is? He goes back to the original state of Adam and Eve before they sinned, and there was no robe of light. And so the kid derobes himself, and so he derobes himself, and there's a mess, and he's destroying the living room. I have to remember LFG. Look for God even in moments like that. Does that make sense? And it changes the perspective that you have with everything that happens in your life. Super helpful, super practical when it comes to developing your spirituality. Let's see here. Oh, this is another one. This is the last one I'll share with you guys, and then we'll continue on. TDJ. TDJ is thought dumping journey. One of the most powerful things that I have developed through the years is journaling my thoughts and journaling my emotions. Because not only does this help me with my spirituality, it also helps me with my emotions, my psychology, and also my physical being. There have been times that I have journals. I buy them from Walmart, and so it doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be something, off the wall. But I will buy these little journals, probably like a 5x7 sheet of paper, and probably like this size, and I would journal my thought on the day. If I'm going through a really difficult time, a really challenging time, and some of our members now are going through a difficult time with all the deaths that have been happening. Some of them have already anticipated the deaths because it's been a long time coming and it finally has happened, and the person is resting now. That's a good case. But in other cases, it came as a shock. No one knew this was going to happen. Like in the case of Ken. We knew that Ken was physically not all up to par, but no one expected him to go from one to the next. And the next thing we know, on the 19th, we're having a funeral. So in moments like that, the emotions are raw, the emotions are hit. Taking time to thought dump a journal, and you take your thoughts, you take your emotions, you dump them on a piece of paper. It is therapeutic to the individual that does this. Some individuals will take that piece of paper because they've written so many negative emotions on that and burn it, or they'll get rid of it. But they released it from their life, they released it from their minds, they released it from their emotions, and it gives them the ability to reconnect with God. Does that make sense? Practical things that help you become a spiritual person. Of course, the last time that Hannah shared with you guys about telling her testimony, she shared a lot of great things, a lot of great advice when it comes to that. And I will let her just kind of touch on some of the things that she discussed. And then I will share with you again about how to feed people wisely. So Hannah, why don't you share with us about reaching to the heart?
So the third one in this series is reaching the heart. So we talked about number one, being a spiritual person. And we talked about being able to use your story and your relationship with God to be able to connect with other people and help them to see how to connect with God. So reaching the heart, when you hear that phrase, what comes to mind?
Get below the superficial.
Okay, so kind of dig in a little deeper. Anybody else?
Fellowship and helping people, meeting their needs.
Okay, yep. Anything else?
Well, they keep peeling back the layers because there's many layers to reach the heart and go through those processes.
Yeah, so a little bit of all of that, right? When we're thinking about working not for Christ, but with Christ, right? Ellen White has this quote here. She says that your success will not depend so much upon your knowledge and accomplishments right? Oftentimes we think we need to know all this stuff before we need to share Jesus, right? Oh, if I don't say the right things, it's good. I'm going to blow it. I'm going to fail, right? If I don't know the answer to the questions, I'm not going to be able to, move forward with them also. We don't have to worry. The success isn't dependent upon what we know, what our accomplishments are, anything like that. Your success will not depend, not that you shouldn't know your stuff, right? We still need to know it. So it's not going to depend so much upon your knowledge and accomplishments as upon your ability to find your way to the heart by being social and coming close to the people. You may turn the current of their thoughts more readily than the most able discourse. So the question is here, how do we come close to people? How do we reach the heart? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. Listening, okay?
Spending time, you don't really come close or get close without spending time.
Yeah. It's definitely a time investment, isn't it?
Be real.
Being real and authentic, right? Being able to share some of your own things. Anything else?
Ask questions.
Ask questions, yeah. How else can we reach the heart?
When it comes to asking questions, one of the things I was taught when I took nursing was that you listen, then you ask to make sure you understood what they were saying.
Right? Yeah.
I know with my job as a bus driver, I have quite a few single mothers and they're out there with their kids, and they just sometimes need to have somebody to talk to. In fact, one of my mothers was near tears and I said, come here, and she got on the bus and I gave her a hug and, and if they know that I'm praying for them, then it opens up and because not all my kids are Adventists or anything, but just be there and listen and hope where you can.
Right. Anybody else want to share thoughts on this? Thank you. Have you guys heard the saying, a person doesn't care how much you know until they know how much you care? So this is kind of the basis of reaching the heart, right? So being able to come, oftentimes when we think about evangelism or things like that, we think of big events, having a speaker come in and sending out flyers and putting on these big programs. But yes, those are ways to evangelize. But even more effective than that is the time that we spend with people one-on-one in their homes, in their life, right? And bringing them into our lives. There's a couple things to think about when we're thinking about reaching people's heart. One is attachment. So what do I mean by attachment? I'm curious what you guys think of when you hear this word attachment.
Well, that's probably a similar to even a pet. When you spend time, or a child, or an adult, makes no difference, the age or size of the person, they're outside their point in life. When you spend time, you form attachments.
Okay.
I was thinking more of finding something common, joining in some way, finding common interests so that you can feel like you have a relationship.
Okay.
Empathy with them.
Empathy.
You can join the journey.
Join their journey.
Yeah, it's not about what I want.
And those are all very, very good. But when I'm thinking of attachment, I'm thinking of the way people form strong, healthy, what's the word? Bonds. Thank you. Yes. Strong, healthy bonds with each other. So there are, in the realm of psychology, there are 4 different attachment styles, right? How many of you are familiar with those 4 Okay, we just have a couple people here, so I'm gonna go ahead and list them out because when we're coming close to people, it's helpful to be able to recognize these different attachment styles in order to be able to minister to them to what would feel safe to them. I don't know if that makes sense. All right, so we have, and help me if I forget it because I don't have them memorized very well. So we have insecure.
So in other words, they're not necessarily all positive attachment styles.
No. So we have insecure, we have safe, avoidance, and then there's one that's a combination. Do you remember the name of that one?
No,
Carl? Okay, so insecure, safe, avoidant, and I'm gonna just
Ambivalent.
put ambivalent. Okay. Okay, sorry guys. I'm gonna try that one.
A-M-B-I-V-A.
Thank you. All right, there we go. All right, and there may be a couple others, and there's always combinations. And so all of us growing up in the family of origin that we grew up in, whether it was biological or adopted or foster or however we grew up, we have a combination of these different attachment styles. However, usually there's going to be one or two that are a little bit more prominent. So with the insecure attachment style, this is where people don't feel safe. They weren't able to learn how to develop connections and bonds that are safe and healthy. And so they may be very insecure in the way that they present themselves to the world. They may always be second guessing themselves or putting themselves down, things like this. A person who has a primarily safe attachment style is going to be a person who's generally going to be, they may not be, you know, a billionaire or anything, but they're going to be successful in life. They're going to have, generally they're going to be happier. They're going to be more satisfied with where they are in life and where they're going. They might have a plan to get where they're going. They've been able to navigate very well. Avoidant attachment style, I think it's kind of self-explanatory. They avoid getting into situations where they have to be maybe dependent on someone. So they might be very independent. They may never ask for help. They may be those people who are always helping others, but are never, they don't know how to accept the help. They don't know how to ask for it. And then we have the ambivalent, which is, okay, I feel this way and I feel this way, right? So an ambivalent attachment style is one moment they may feel close and secure and doing well in a relationship, you know, and then the next moment they're having problems. They're, you know, doubting themselves, doubting the friendship or the companionship or whatever relationship they're in. So just so you have a little idea of what each of those is, I encourage you to go and read more about these attachment styles, just to be able to learn, you know, more about the kind of people that we're going to be, you know, that we're working with. And it'll help, you know, whatever relationship you have, whether it's your family, friends, loved ones. Okay, so that's the attachment. The second thing to think about when we're wanting to reach someone's heart is connection. And that's a little bit kind of what you were talking about it. So connection is the ability to communicate and to find, like, to reach across that divide, to be able to find a common ground, a commonality, kind of like what you were saying, right? Or, you know, even joining in on their journey. So attachment and connection, they kind of go hand in hand. So understanding, what kind of attachment that someone might be having, and how can you, with their attachment style, how can you be Jesus in the flesh to them? How can you connect with them? What are some of the things that you guys have in common? Let's see here. Any questions so far, or comments, or thoughts?
And as we think about all this, there's always this element of the one doing all this processing also is experiencing a form of attachment. So,
Yes.
I tend to think of life through left brain and right brain, or the 4 personality types, your choleric, your sanguine, right? And so all of those divisions of psychology or whatever, you're coming from your own set of those,
Yes.
which colors how you perceive and how you experience life.
Yes, and that's a very good point, because oftentimes, it's easy to compare ourselves to each other, right? Say, well, they're so good doing this or that or whatever. But understanding where you're coming from, so understanding what kind of attachment style you have as well, you're able to reach out to people who, and just because you have a certain attachment style, you have to stay in that one either, though, right? So as we learn to work with Christ and have him change us, we can then find another person who has the same attachment style that we once had, or that we're working through, or whatever, right? And then we're able to then connect with them, because now we have something in common. We have, a common battle that we're both fighting, right? I mean, we're all fighting sin, right? But it's a very specific one, right? So yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Well, it's so interesting listening to this. This is my husband's language, and I don't think like that. And so for me, having a relationship with Jesus and just asking him for the ability to, like when someone comes into ACS, and I've worked with them maybe 10 years, having them as a customer, and just being a friendly spokesperson for the store, somebody who's willing to listen to them as they come. It's amazing how that relationship progresses just from you being a friendly face.
Yeah.
And, but this is interesting hearing this, which is, I could see Gladys thinking about these things, and I've never thought about it. So these are very good points that you're sharing, and I have to listen more.
And this is why I want to think about these things. Like, we think, like when people, like where I work, I'm constantly, greeting people every day, whether it's on the phone or in person. And so I don't sit there and think, oh, what kind of attachment style do they have, right? Or am I connecting with them? No, I'm thinking, how can I help them have a good experience in this office? That's my mentality. But when I'm lying in bed, I might be thinking more about stuff like, so in the moment, yeah, we're probably not going to be thinking about that, right? And this is where that intentionality that Pastor was talking about earlier comes in. So we're intentional, lying in bed thinking about, oh, what's a good attachment style, or what's the one that I'm at right now, or how have I been able to connect with people, and could I do that better? Was there something that not that we want to have too many thoughts laying in bed, I never go to sleep, right? But yeah, being intentional about that. And so thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions or comments? I know you're waiting for me to tell you it's your turn. It's not your turn yet, though.
Oh.
See, he's all ready to go. Okay, so just a couple other things that I want to bring out here. A couple things, just having the fruit of the Spirit, right? This is how we have the fruit of the Spirit and share that fruit, right? By spending time with God and all of these things. It kind of all leads up to being able to reach the heart. I think the other thing I wanted to bring out today was, and this might have been better at the beginning, but I'm going to say it now. How many of you are familiar with IQ test scores? How many of you are familiar with EQ scores? Okay, so half and half. So IQ is our intelligent quotient, right? Quotient, I think, right? EQ is our emotional quotient, and studies have proven over and over that our emotional quotient is more important in our success in life than our IQ, right? So the way that we treat people, the way we interact with people, the way we form those connections and form those attachments with other people really makes a difference. It goes right back to what we started, with people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So I'm just going to end with a short story, and I think that the story will introduce what you want to talk about. So I remember when we were in Kentucky doing Bible work, and this was before we were together. And I had all my Bible studies ended up an hour, 2 hours long, right? So I think we'd been there for maybe half of the time that we were supposed to be there. And he asked me to go to a Bible study with him. And he was in and out just like that. Bada bing, bada boom, we're done. See you next week. And I was like, whoa. Then he came to a Bible study with me. And he's like, after we left, he's like, that was way too long. So I'll share what I did in my Bible studies, and then I'll let him share what he did in his. So in my Bible studies, the first 30 minutes was just talking with them, seeing how their week went, seeing how their kids are doing, seeing how their job is, connecting with them, reaching over the divide, right? And finding ways that we could have common ground. And then the rest of it was Bible study. And then at the end, again, we make plans for the next week and stuff. So that's kind of how my Bible studies flowed. How did yours go?
30 seconds of figuring out how their life went. This next one that I want to share, and thank you, Hannah, for sharing that, because this component here is not in our manual. And so this is something new, and so I learned something, I wrote it down in my notes as a future reference. But the next one that we have to share is feeding people wisely. When I started Bible working and knocking on doors and looking for Bible studies, I came across a guy that was a Bible student. And this guy had his house filled with Bibles, filled with charts, filled with theology, filled with different type of commentaries and concordances, you name it. And so I remember that he was excited to see me, because his goal was to convert me. That was his goal. So he invited me in, gave me a cup of water. I remember we sat in the veranda, and we're sitting there just talking and we're studying. And I made a brutal mistake, a mistake that many of us have made and will make if we haven't made it already. And so the first question that he had for me is, what is the mark of the beast? And so my response was to give him the answer to what is the mark of the beast. And I gave him the answer solely because this guy knows his Bible, he has charts, he has commentaries. This guy must understand everything I understand as a Seventh-day Adventist. And so let me just fast forward this Bible study series, because the mark of the beast, if you're looking at amazing facts, A mark of the beast is talked about in lesson number 17, lesson number 18, somewhere near the end. And so you never start with mark of the beast on number 1. Here's the reason why, because as I shared with him my answer to the mark of the beast, guess what happened?
He shut down.
He shut down. Why? Because it disagreed with what he thought the mark of the beast was. Now, he thought the mark of the beast was, 666, some number, some scanning thing that, is interjected into your palm or your forehead, because that's what the Bible says in the book of Revelation. And no matter what I told him, no matter what I said to explain, because remember, when you talk about lesson number 17, and you're starting here lesson number 1 with someone who's brand new, never met this guy, don't know, I don't even remember his name. Was he married? No clue. Did he have a cat, dog, cockroach? No idea. I had no idea because I just met that guy. So I went from lesson number 1 to lesson number 17, and I missed lesson 2 through 16. Does that make sense? Part of the reason why Adventism makes so much sense from a theological perspective is a way that we have built our theology. All of our theology as the Seventh-day Adventist Church builds on itself. Like when you talk about the Sabbath, Sabbath is probably lesson number 7, lesson number 10. And so in the amazing facts is what I'm talking about. So lesson number 7, let's say for example, it's lesson number 7. In the first 6 lessons, you are covering the reason why the Sabbath is important. Does that make sense? The reason why you need the Sabbath, the reason why the Sabbath is significant, and so forth and so on. So once you get to the Sabbath, all these 6 lessons, by God's grace and the development of amazing facts, or it is written, or Breath of Life Bible studies, or Discover Bible studies, or whatever Bible study series you use. The idea is for these first 6 lessons to help you get to lesson number 7, explain lesson number 7, and reach an appeal for lesson number 7, and have your student accept number 7. But if you start with lesson number 7 without having laid a foundation, they're going to fight you on lesson number 7. They're going to argue with you that you believe the Sabbath is Saturday, but I believe the Sabbath is Sunday. Well, if you covered these lessons before, you begin to dismantle that theology. Does that make sense? So because I started in lesson number 17 with this guy, and I didn't cover the Sabbath, I didn't cover the change of the Sabbath, I didn't cover the 2300-day prophecy, I didn't cover the second coming of Jesus Christ, I didn't even cover accepting Jesus Christ, I covered nothing. I just started with a mark of the beast. Why? Because that's what he asked me. So I'm going to give him what he's asking for. And little did I realize that I had destroyed my opportunity and my chance to make a significant impact with that individual, because I did not feed them wisely. Let me give you another example that doesn't have to do with a human being. It has to do with what's going on in my house right now. Right now, where we live, there is dirt. When a contracting company comes, they take these big excavators and these big bulldozers and these big, what do they call those things? Shovel trucks. The shovel, you know what I'm talking about, okay. And they dig in this dirt a massive hole. Then another company comes and they have these big, huge, I've never seen this truck before, but it looks like a praying mantis is the best way to explain it. And this thing has a big boom hand that is connected to this concrete dispenser and is connected to a hole, and this big boom hand just spills a bunch of concrete into this hole. Does that make sense? And that's how they build the foundation of the actual house. They leave, and then another contractor comes, and that contractor is responsible for putting up the framing of the house. So now you have all these sticks, and you have all these joists, and then you have the roofer guys come, and they're starting to build all these things. Then you have another company that comes and installs the actual windows. And as they install the windows, they install the doors, they install the garage area, and then you have the roofers which come and put the tile on the roof, and then you have the painters come, and then the electricians come, etc. In other words, everything goes in a process. What would happen if I wanted to build a house and I just went ahead and started with the roof? I forget the foundation, forget the walls, I just want to build a roof. Well, then some people might argue, well, this is an A-frame home. No, this is not an A-frame home. This is bypassing a process. What if I wanted to start the house with a fireplace? Just a fireplace. I mean, forget the roof, forget the walls, forget the fact that there's a chimney down that comes down from the fireplace into my home to warm up my home. I just want to start off with the fireplace. And so that makes no logical sense to start with a fireplace because that's only part of the process and not the whole process altogether. Once I understood this concept, I began to realize how to feed people wisely. It is super tempting when you have a Bible study conversation with someone and you're developing Bible studies with them and they ask you a question about the secret rapture. You've just met them. You've just had your first Bible study. You haven't even had your first Bible study. They ask you about the secret rapture and then you ask the temptation to answer real quick. When you answer real quick, remember the concept of the first story, you bypass a whole bunch of information that helps them to fully understand why we don't believe in the secret rapture. Furthermore, when you bypass, you are giving them the secret rapture, which is just a chimney, rather than the roof, rather than the house. What is best to do, and it took me a while for me to understand this, what is best to do is to tell them, you know, that's a fantastic question. And we are going to cover that lesson and talk about the secret rapture further on into the future. But before we get there, and I'll give them the example of the house. Let's build a theological house. Let's start with a foundation. Have you ever heard of a house with just a roof? Oh, no, I've never heard about a house with just a roof. Have you ever heard of a house just a chimney? No, I've never heard about that. Well, that's what those subjects are. They're the chimney and they're the roofs of what the Bible theology is trying to teach us. So why don't we start at ground zero and let's start with the foundation and let's figure out from there, when we get to the secret rapture, everything will make sense. I remember I had when I finally understood this, I shared this idea with Tina McMakin. Have I ever shared you guys a story about Tina McMakin? Tina McMakin was a young single mom that lived in a single woman abuse center. Now, I didn't know that it was an abuse center. And so, but that's where she lived and that's where I met her. And so I remember when I first started studying the Bible with her, I said to her, this is what I want you to do. Whenever we study together, grab yourself from Walmart a notebook. And in that notebook, you're going to write all the questions you can think about God and religion and the Bible and the church, whatever you can think of, and you write them in that journal. And then whenever we come and we study together, we'll cover some of your questions and we'll answer some of your questions. Well, the next time I came, guess how many questions she had developed for me? 181 questions. And I'm thinking, this lady is really wanting to know a lot about God. So I took those 181 and I told her, this is what we're going to do. I have a sneaking suspicion because I looked through the list, and so I looked at a lot of them were similar in nature that the questions that she was asking. And I said, why don't we do this? Let's take this 181 questions and put them against the Bible study series we're going to cover. This time I was using It Is Written, Mark Finley's Bible study series. Let's put them against this Bible study series and let's see what happens. Let's see if your questions, 181 questions, can be answered by the Bible study series that we're using. And that's what we did. So we started with lesson number 1, lesson number 2, lesson number 3, 10 questions were answered. Lesson number 4, 20 questions were answered. Lesson number 5, lesson number 6, lesson number 12, lesson number 22, 179 more questions were answered. By the time we finished the series, all 181 questions were answered. Why? Because that's all we did. We went through the Bible in a systematic, consistent way, and all her questions were answered. And when we got to the end, this case was good. She was baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Does that make sense? That all happened to me. If someone has started with something controversial, something earth-shattering, something I didn't fully understand, I would have shut them off like many people have shut me off. But because I did not go in that direction and rather began, someone began, Mike Johnson, began to feed me systematically, wisely, that's when I became more hungry and hungry. And watch this. This is what I found when it comes to studying with someone. When you share with them in a systematic way and avoid the temptation to just give them all the food at one time, you create something called hunger for more. They want to know more. And I love doing this when it comes to a Bible study series, because if I'm covering let's say, for example, I'm covering the 10 Commandments, and I share the concept of the 10 Commandments, and I share how God still has all 10 Commandments effective, even to today, for everyone that believes and worships Him. And that one of those 10 Commandments is a special one that really connects you with God. Do you want to know what it is? And my student will say, oh yeah, what is it? Is it, spending time with God? Is it going to church? I said, no, it's all of it, but better. Think of it like a piece of cake that is the best piece of cake you've ever had in your entire life. Think about it as a glass of lemonade on a hot valley day. You guys tell me that it gets about 110, 115 here, is what I was told. No? Well, praise the Lord if it doesn't get to 115, because you're making me happy. And so, but let's say, for example, it gets into the 100 or even high 90s, a nice glass of cold lemonade on one of those days is what this next subject is about. So I create that hunger in the mind of my student that next week they want to find out what that chocolate cake is. They want to find out what that lemonade is. And that's when I hit them with Sabbath. Does that make sense? Because it connects really perfectly with the subject of the 10 Commandments of the law of God. And that's how I build creating hunger for more by feeding people wisely. So people have asked me in the past, well, Pastor, how do you deal with questions? Here's a recommendation. If one of your students or someone you're studying with or a friend or family member asks you a question and you don't know the answer, do not give them an answer. One of the worst things you can do when you don't know the answer to a question is to give them something and they find out you're wrong. Does that make sense? The best thing you can do is you can tell your student, or you can tell someone you're studying with, that's a really good question in which I don't know, but give me some time, let me study it, let me research it, and I'll get back with you. Does that make sense? That's much better than giving them a flippant answer. They ask you a question about X, Y, and Z, and you tell them that the answer is A, B, and C, and they find out it's actually D, E, and F. And so you lose your credibility, you lose your ability to effectively minister to the person. Another way to handle questions that come in is the way that Jesus handled questions that came from the Pharisees and Sadducees in his time. And he answered a question with a question. Does that make sense? Very powerful to do that. I remember how I told you guys a story about Noah. I had a Bible study with Nora. And so we started in a systematic way. We started lesson number 1. We got all the way up to past the Sabbath. She started coming to church on Sabbath. She started bringing her sister to church on Sabbath. And we got to the subject of tithing. We got to the subject of hell. And that's where everything stopped. Because in Nora's mind, hell must be a place of burning hell forever and ever and ever. It cannot be the place where the Seventh-day Adventist Church teaches. It has to be a location where all the enemies of God are sent there to be destroyed forever and ever and ever. And that's where our Bible study stopped, because she couldn't get the concept of the subject of hell actually being good news, because that's what, as Adventists, we share about the subject of hell. As we continued our Bible study, I began to realize that there was a lot of resistance with the subject of hell. And when we got to the state of death, it's even worse, because you really wanted people to be alive and to be burning and to be tortured. Yeah, there was some issues there. Obviously there were some things that were going on in her life that she wanted people punished for in her particular life. But I remember that as we began studying a little bit more, she actually invited her head elder. Now, in a Pentecostal church, they don't call him a head elder. I don't know the structure or the format of a Pentecostal church. I don't remember it because I was too young to really notice it. But I remember that she brought him over to the house, and as she brought him over to the house, we began discussing back and forth. And he began asking me about the Sabbath, and he began to attack me about, what the Seventh-day Adventist Church believes, and attack me about Sister White, and attack me on all these other things. And as we continued more and more, I began to realize this guy was getting really, really volatile and really combative in this particular discussion. It got so bad that he stood up and he commanded me to stand up. And I thought we were going to go toe to toe. I thought it was going to be like a prison ministry situation. I put him in a headlock. We roll on the ground right in front of the Bible study student. Really bad situation. So I don't know what to expect at this moment. So he's standing really close to me, face to face, nose to nose, lips to lips. And he tells me, we can't continue anymore. You're not listening to me. You're not answering my questions, and so forth and so on. I said, listen, I am asking. I am answering your questions. As I know you're answering my questions by asking me a question. And I said, well, yeah, because if I can ask you a question and you can understand the question that I'm asking and answer the question that I'm asking, then you will understand what you're asking. My answer will become clear. And so what ended up happening through that conversation, he said, no, let's pray together. So we prayed. And after he prayed, this was back in the days when I was bodybuilding. So I was really, really big. And so this guy tried to escape from that Bible study. And I grabbed him by the leg. This is the first time I've ever done this in a Bible study. I'm a big, huge guy. So I grabbed him by the leg. I said, you're not going anywhere. And I put him onto the couch. And I said, I'm not done asking questions. And we continued on. And the guy was jumping around. He was getting up. He was looking out the window. He would say, my wife's outside waiting for me. We would look out the window. There's no wife. There's no car. There's nothing out there. The guy's just trying to escape because that's the power of asking questions. Does that make sense? So when you have a student that is asking questions, answer their questions with a question. And you will begin to realize, they'll begin to realize that as you do this, it's a very effective way to help defuse some of the conflict, to help the student to understand the answer that is found in Scripture. And by the way, it's the way that Jesus effectively worked with the Pharisees and Sadducees of his day. Because the Pharisees and Sadducees knew the answer that Jesus was asking. But they refused to give him the answer. And they would ask him further questions and further questions, even though Jesus very well knew they knew the answer to the question. And that's what the power of asking questions is. Make sense? So you have being a spiritual person. You have telling your testimony. You have reaching the heart. You have feeding people wisely. Next month, we're going to share with you guys the concept of a plan of evangelism. What does a cycle of evangelism looks like? And in the context of a church, what does it look like? What do you do for the first 6 months of the year? What do you do for the next 6 months of the year? What do you do for the first 2 months of the year? What do you do for the first 3 months of the year? What do you do at the end of the year? We'll talk about that cycle of evangelism next time. And more importantly, we'll begin to discuss what we're going to do in 2024 and how I take that cycle of evangelism and transport it into a mode of evangelism, a vehicle of evangelism, so that when we hit 2024, we know exactly what we're going to do in this particular church for this particular community. So we'll start that conversation, that training next month. Make sense? All right, well, let's sing again our song. And I don't even have to put it on the board anymore. You guys know it. Lord, some eyes and love that's so and may I find in my heart to give that soul. That's all. That's all. Father in heaven, I pray that you will be with us on this particular Sabbath. As we have learned these concepts and ideas of how to work with people, the practice comes when we deal with people. And so I pray, God, that if we don't have people in our lives and who we can share the gospel with or share these conversations and these points of contact with, that you will bring them into our lives and that you will help us to make a significant impact in other people's lives before it's too late for us. Bless, guide, and direct us, we pray, in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. And thank you guys so much.